Marceline Day burst onto the scene in the mid-20s as a successful silent ingenue, eventually finding megastardom that she carried into the talkies. But by 1933, she had retired. Why? Join me as I investigate. Marceline Day was born Marceline Newlin in 1908 in Colorado Springs to Frank and Irene Newlin. Her older sister was Alice Newlin, who would go on to become star Alice Day. If you haven't already, be sure to please check out my video about Alice from last week. According to Silence is Platinum, Frank and Irene divorced shortly after Marceline was born, and in 1910, Irene took her two daughters and moved back in with her parents, I'm assuming in Salt Lake City, as multiple sources indicate that Marceline grew up there. However, like Alice, Marceline also attended high school in the Venice neighborhood of Los Angeles. Silent Hall of Fame indicates that Irene and her two daughters moved there in early 1923. Alice entered show business first in 1923 and became a Max Sennett bathing beauty, and Marceline followed her, becoming a beauty herself in 1924 and began to act in Sennett's comedy shorts just as Alice had. She made her film debut with Alice in Sennett's 1924 Picking Peaches. Later that year, she worked her way up to being a leading lady in Sennett shorts, independent of Alice, starring in Black Oxfords with Sidney Smith and Anna Dodge. She then, like Alice before her, starred as the leading lady to Harry Langdon in the films The Luck of the Foolish and The Handsome Cabman, playing ingenue roles as the beautiful young lady that finds herself in many comedic situations. It's interesting to note that in 1924, Marceline and Alice were playing the exact same type of roles at the same studio, both swapping in and out as Harry Langdon's leading lady and both serving often as a foil to the vampy comedienne Madeline Herlock. However, while Alice stuck around with Sennett, Marceline left the studio in early 1925, signed with Universal, and starred in her first feature film that year opposite cowboy star Hoot Gibson in Taming of the West. According to Silent Hall of Fame, movie critics praised Marceline's performance and called her a promising newcomer. 1925 was a busy year for Marceline at Universal. She starred in 4 shorts with Arthur Lake and in 2 other feature films, including Red Clay with William Desmond and The White Outlaw with Jack Hoxsey, which also got her good notices. She also starred with Richard Talmadge in The Wall Street Whiz at FBO and supported Anna Q. Nilsson in The Splendid Road at First National. 1926 was an even more successful year for Marceline. She starred with Norman Carey and Lionel Barrymore in The Barrier at MGM, in which critics praised her yet again. She starred with Jack Hoxsey again in Looking for Trouble, and began starring in her own top-billed vehicles at MGM and Tiffany, all of which were highly successful. These included The Boyfriend, College Days, and That Model from Paris, a comedy that saw her as a plain Jane that must pretend to be a Parisian model once she meets a wealthy playboy played by Burt Littell. According to Silent Hall of Fame, there isn't a movie magazine or newspaper of that era that does not give Marceline Day rave reviews for her outstanding performances. Critics referred to many of her performances that year as a quote-unquote revelation. She was so successful in 1926 that she was named a Wampus Baby Star alongside Joan Crawford, Mary Astor, Janet Gaynor, and Dolores Del Rio. Marceline entered 1927 as a full-fledged movie star. She first starred with John Barrymore in The Beloved Rogue as a ward of King Louis XI that finds romance with the title character, a poet and court fool who is also a hero out to help the poor. The New York Times called Marceline appealing in the film. She also starred with Lars Hansen in Captain Salvation as the fiancée of a free-thinking minister. However, her most famous film of that year, and arguably of her entire career, was the MGM horror classic London After Midnight, which also starred the world-famous Lon Chaney. The film was a huge hit and is sadly lost. Many film historians consider it to be the most sought-after lost silent film. Marceline continued her stardom into 1928, starring with Lon Chaney again and Betty Compson in The Big City, with Owen Moore in Stolen Love, with Don Alvarado in Driftwood, with Ramon Navarro in A Certain Young Man, and starring in another well-remembered silent classic, The Cameraman, with Buster Keaton, another huge hit that saw her as the object of Buster's affections, leading to many comedic situations. In 1929, Marceline made a successful talkie debut, starring with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. in the part talkie The Jazz Age at FBO, in which one reviewer called her better than the film. She also co-starred with Clara Bow in her smash hit talkie debut, The Wild Party at Paramount, and also starred with Rod LaRock in The One Woman Idea at Fox. Also in 1929, Marceline appeared with her sister Alice in the Meet My Sister number of Show of Shows, Warner Brothers' musical talkie extravaganza. Curiously enough, like Alice, Marceline hadn't made many films at Warner Brothers and had only appeared in a few at First National, which by this point was absorbed by the larger studio. But I'm sure that the appeal of having real-life sisters singing together in this cute musical number allowed for Warner Brothers to make arrangements for the sisters to return to work there. However, like Alice, Marceline's stardom slipped a bit when she entered the 1930s. She began 1930 starring with Kenneth McKenna in The Temple Tower, a Bulldog Drummond drama at Fox. Following this film, she shifted exclusively to B-movies at smaller, usually Poverty Row studios. Although, like Alice and many other stars that I've covered, Marceline's work at these smaller studios was exemplary and gave her a chance to play roles outside of her usual niche as an innocent ingenue. She starred as a college girl opposite Benny Rubin and Rex Lees in the 1930 musical comedy Sunny Skies. She gave a wonderfully warm comedic performance in The Mystery Train in 1931 as a young woman wrongfully convicted who escapes a prison-bound train and finds herself in many mixed-up situations. She handles the comedy of the scene in which she is thrown from a horse into the mud with an expertise that is just so delightful to watch. In 1932, she starred as a murder suspect in The King Murder and as a fiery young woman in The Crusader with Evelyn Brent. She also returned to her roots and played the leading lady in several westerns, including The Pocatello Kid with Ken Maynard, Broadway to Cheyenne with Rex Bell, and The Telegraph Trail with John Wayne. Marceline's final 3 films in 1933 were a mixed bag of role sizes. She played supporting roles in Damaged Lives and in By Appointment Only, having only a few great scenes in the latter with Lou Cody. She returned to being a leading lady again in her final film, The Fighting Parson, another Western in which she starred opposite Hoot Gibson in 1933. Following the wrap of this film, Marceline retired. Marceline had married furrier Alan Klein in 1930, but the couple divorced some years later. I'm assuming the beginning of her film retirement saw Marceline enjoying a quiet life with her husband, but it is virtually impossible to find any information about what she did for the remainder of her considerably long life. We do know that she married a man named John Arthur and remained married to him from the late 40s until his death in 1980. However, Marceline did not like to talk about her Hollywood career or be in the limelight, so following her retirement in 1933, she never gave another interview and never discussed her life again as a star. Marceline lived to be 91 years old and passed away in 2000 in Cathedral City, California. So we are left with the question, why did Marceline Day's stardom falter in the talkies after such an impressive start? Like with Alice, it's hard to answer that question. She had a great voice and made a splash in the early talkies of 1929, but following her work in Show of Shows, she too fell through the cracks at major studios and was forced to try her luck at Poverty Row. I'm assuming that again, there were just so many young talented stars at this time that Marceline had a lot of competition, and probably saw many of her usual roles at the big studios being taken by new, even younger ingenues that had arrived to Hollywood from the Broadway stage. But Marceline was not discouraged and kept working strongly for the next 3 years, giving some truly interesting performances at Poverty Row that demonstrated a larger range that she had as an actress. I suggest checking out The Mystery Train and The King Murder on YouTube to see some of these talkie performances. Also, be sure to see her star in such classics from the silent era as The Cameraman, The Beloved Rogue, and The Luck of the Foolish, all also available on YouTube to watch. Marceline Day was an extremely talented star that should have had a better chance in the talkies and a longer career. At least we have so many of her wonderful performances left to enjoy. Here's to you, Marceline Day. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom lasted only briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I cover the silent talkie career of Priscilla Dean. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend.